Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us here on the program where we cover the most interesting live trials and legal stories in the news today. Bunch of things to cover. Let's get started. Okay, we're going to break this down. First thing I want everybody to know, when you hear names like LaMarcus Davidson, LaTalvis Cobbins, or Vanessa Coleman, these are the people that were also already convicted of these crimes. This is the lineup right here. And now Eric Boyd is the fifth person to be put on trial for the rape, murder, kidnapping of these two young people. I want to break down what we just heard because there's a lot to talk about. Joining me right now, I have two great guests, trial attorney Wendy Patrick and Law and Crime legal analyst Matthew Mangino. Good morning to you both. Wendy, I'm going to start with you. My gosh, him taking the stand is a big development, but where was he all these past years to come forward with this account of what happened? What do you make of his testimony?
You know, I make of it the same kind of source credibility problem that you often have in these types of trials. You know, where was he? He was facing 2 life sentences. Where is he now? He's looking at 50 years at 85%. It's a very different scenario. So 2 things, Jesse. Obviously, the prosecution is going to argue, hey, you know, this is a balancing of evils. We do what we need to do to seek justice on behalf of the victims. And that means convicting everybody who was involved. You can also see what the defense is going to argue, and that motive matters. And when, in terms of where was he all these years and why is he coming forward now? What they're going to need to do, both sides are going to seek to do this, is corroborate everything he says with independent evidence that can't have a bias either way, to be able to learn a little bit more about, was he an acquaintance or accomplice? Is he guilty by association, or does he actually have firsthand knowledge of the events that he's testifying about?
Look, his testimony is going to continue today, and as you said, the cross-examination by the defense is going to be something to watch. Matthew, my question to you is, his plea deal, or his deal that he worked out, that's not finalized yet, right? It's all dependent upon how he actually conducts himself and how his cross-examination goes. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, I would think that this plea deal is based on his full and complete cooperation, and that he testifies in the manner in which he has explained his involvement and Boyd's involvement in this case. You know, I think if he stumbles on cross-examination, that might be that's not enough maybe to say well, this plea deal is off. But I think if he goes in and testifies contrary to what he has told the district attorney's office in this case, you know, that could jeopardize his plea agreement. But I think just poor testimony and not being a good witness and not being a good witness on cross-examination is probably not enough to withdraw the plea deal.
He's got a lot to gain. We can all agree on that. And let's play a little bit more of his testimony from yesterday, because we are going to be waiting for that live feed. We are going to be waiting for him to come back on the stand, but let's see what he said yesterday. Wendy, I got to say, this is a strange sight. He's a prosecution star witness. They have him up there. He's wearing glasses. He's being very polite. He's even describing one of the victims as Mr. Newsom. Can we not forget the fact what he was convicted of? And that's the question here. This guy literally is a monster. He was convicted of a heinous, heinous attack. And so my question to you is, how does the state supposed to present a witness like this?
State presents a witness like this with all of the tools they have to allow the jury to appreciate what kind of testimony they're hearing. What you're hearing is very short answers. Probably doesn't want to talk a lot because, as you mentioned, he was involved as well. But they've got to understand that through the eyes of a monster, if that's the way he's characterized, you don't have the kind of horror and visceral response that all the rest of us would have, including those jurors. So on the one hand, when you do choose to put on witnesses like this, it often has to be within the context of who they are and how they perceived what they saw. So he would not have been as overcome with emotion as anybody else in describing what he saw or recalling what he saw as what he's doing on the stand. So in that sense, during closing argument, the prosecution can explain exactly what the jury saw and what weight to assign to the details this man is providing them.
No, that's a really good point. And if we just take a step back, Matthew, I mean, we're talking about Eric Boyd. From 2008, he was the one who was least responsible for what happened. He was only convicted of lesser crimes and really accessory after the fact, serving an 18-year prison sentence. Were you surprised that the prosecution reopened this and said, we're going after the final person? We believe we have enough evidence to go after him. And as we keep saying, they make a deal with somebody who's already convicted. to go after Boyd because, again, he's been implicated just now by Mr. Thomas as the person who actually shot Newsom. So I'm curious your thoughts about them going after Mr. Boyd.
Well, obviously, if they have a witness who says that he was certainly more involved than just an accessory after the fact, that in fact he was the trigger man in the death of one of the victims, certainly you have to go forward. Unfortunately, the person that puts him in that position of killing one of the victims is himself a convicted in this case, and certainly it's going to be a credibility issue for this jury. They're going to listen to this convicted defendant involved in this case all of a sudden, 12 years later, implicate another person in one of the murders. So, I think that the prosecution, has its hands full with this witness. That they're going to rely on this witness to carry this case for them.
There is a lot of room for the defense to cross-examine this guy and really pinpointing what his involvement was. Wendy, what this testimony, why it's so important, really, and this is the really main part about this, is he is implicating Boyd as the person who murdered Mr. Newsom and then set his body on fire. This is really the crux of the prosecution's case. Now, let me ask you, are these details so precise that it'd be impossible for someone to make them up? I mean, does it seem like this is someone recounting what he actually saw, or is this fabrication? Your thoughts?
That is such a difficult question for this jury, and I'll tell you why. Two things. First of all, the jury has to be the judge of credibility, and this witness isn't giving them much to work with. His answers, many of them at least, are vague, they're short, they don't disclose the amount of detail that these jurors would like. On the other hand, we've got both cooperation with the prosecution, but we also need corroboration, not of the way this man died, that was already proven forensically, but in terms of Mr. Boyd's involvement, his fingerprints, if you will, on the gun, on the one as the one who pulled the trigger, all the types of things that jurors would naturally want to see, especially in the CSI era in which we live. Those are the kind of details that'll need to be corroborated, because this witness obviously is implicating Mr. Boyd, but of course not in the greatest amount of detail as we would all like. Now, that doesn't mean that he's not telling the truth or that a jury's not going to believe he's telling the truth. It just means it's an uphill battle in terms of establishing this type of source credibility, considering who this witness is.
Okay, talking about an uphill battle, I mean, Matthew, if you were defense counsel here and now you have an opportunity to cross-examine this man, which again, we are waiting to go live in any second, you tell me, were there some parts of that story where you're going to dissect and say, well, let's examine that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I'm going to want to thoroughly examine everything that he said. And as we've just said, that it's limited in what he is said, but he has specifically implicated Eric Boyd in shooting Chris Newsom and setting his body on fire. That's the crux of this case. And so the first thing is, where have you been for the last 12 years? And then begin to dissect, what he said. I thought it's interesting that he talks about he saw 3 flashes. He doesn't say that he heard 3 shots. He saw 3 flashes. I mean, what does that mean? Begin to attack his version of the events. And then obviously, the most important thing here with regard to credibility is, why would George Thomas come forward now? Well, because he faced the prospect of never getting out of prison. And now by coming forward and testifying, he has the opportunity to get out of prison. He certainly has an incentive here to fabricate or to lie.
Yeah.
It's going to benefit him.
The other way of looking at it, though, is if he really wanted to make this up, wouldn't he have said, I was right there when he shot him. I saw him light him on fire. I saw everything. Let me give you the details. No, he's like, I didn't see it. This is what I heard. I heard this woof of a flash, when the body was set on fire. So that's an interesting side perspective that perhaps if he really, he may really be telling the truth, because why didn't he have a direct view of what was happening? Let's play a little bit more of his testimony and we'll break it down. Okay, Wendy, let's start from that last part where the prosecutor explained something that he's been out all of these years, and it wasn't until the attack on Michelle Murphy, again, where allegedly his DNA was left and it was used to implicate him in other things that he did, that they were able to pinpoint him. But do you sense that there's a disturbing feature here that if he really did commit all of these crimes, and we're talking about all the way back in the 90s, that he was allowed to be free? I mean, how does that happen?
The way it happens is the way the prosecutor is doing a very good job of laying it out. He is painting a picture of this man as a sophisticated criminal who took the time to educate himself on the steps he needed to take to pull off some of these crimes. Remember back then, Jesse, we didn't have the kind of forensic technology we have today, but we did have DNA ultimately, which was the undoing of this man. So what we're seeing the prosecutor putting together is a patterns make the predator timeline, combined with this sophisticated knowledge this man had that allowed him, and I love how he's getting this jab in, to enjoy the sunny climate and lifestyle of the Hollywood, really the living the life, living the dream, while all the while knowing that he has 3 murders that he already committed. That is the picture that this prosecutor is painting, and he's also weaving in exactly the way these crimes were solved, the blood at the woman that fought him off, and then just taking that forensically and working backwards and solving all 4 crimes at once.
So this trial really is, he's charged with the murders of 2 women and the attempted murder of a 3rd. But when we talk about Tricia Pacascio, this is something that happened back in the 90s, back in Illinois, 1993. So, Matthew, how will the verdict in this case implicate his trial for Tricia Pacascio, which I believe is going to happen at a later time?
Well, I don't know that it'll have an impact necessarily on the Illinois trial, but what you have is DNA found under the victim's nails in Illinois that matches the DNA that was found at the crime scenes in California. So these cases are going to be intertwined as well, but I don't know that a verdict will necessarily have any impact on the case in Illinois. The thing that's alarming about this, obviously, you have DNA from the assault that didn't end up in a murder, which then was able to be matched with the DNA from the other crime scenes. Unfortunately, and I'm sure the authorities have looked, I mean, this is a long period of time. This is a serial killer. This is a predator. Are there other cases where maybe there isn't DNA, but have some similar circumstances that authorities might look at? It just seems strange to me that over that period of time, he's connected to 3 murders and an attack. But if there are other victims out there, that there hasn't been some DNA match or some evidence that implicates this particular defendant.
Yeah, maybe this won't be the end of the story. Who knows? But I will tell you, we want to break down more of the prosecution's closing argument because, again, the defense will continue on with theirs today, and we'll talk about what they've said so far. Let's continue more with the prosecution from yesterday. And the questioning has begun. Wendy, your perspective on this?
Okay, so Jesse, the prosecution did a very good job of laying out a series of details that this witness testified to. What you're seeing now is impeachment, but here's the problem. To impeach, you've got to make sure you're impeaching on the battles you want to fight and not on the kind of tangential, circumstantial evidence that jury would never hang their hat on anyway. So it's a very delicate dance you see going on here, where obviously nobody remembers exactly what they said 10 years ago or, God forbid, even yesterday. But it's the gist of the testimony, what's really important, and that's what the defense is trying to do here. Now, query whether they're doing a very good job. You don't have a very combative witness, but you do have a witness that is saying, hey, I remember this, I don't remember that, but is very calm and collected.
Yeah.
And so don't see any battles where it really goes to the meat.
It's still early, Wendy. We're going to have to see what happens. But unfortunately, I know we have to sign you off. Matthew's going to stay with us. When we come back, we're jumping live. Stay tuned.